Poor guy, Tim MacMahon. You can't, there's no end to this for you. There's no end to the podcast appearances. There's no end to the TV appearances. There's no end to any of this in your life because every week it's something different with the Dallas Mavericks. And since we have last talked about the Dallas Mavericks, I can't even bear to list all the things that have happened to them. They lost their protest.
Mm-hmm.
They lost a whole bunch of games.
Mm-hmm.
Then they won a really inspiring game to stay alive in the play-in race. Then
right after Luka's rallying cry, we will not shut it down as long as we have any hope. Go on.
Then they lost on purpose to keep or give themselves an 80% chance of keeping the top 10 protected pick that they owe the New York Knicks. In between all that, we don't need to rehash it, but Mark Cuban gave a long media session in which he tried to explain away the Jalen Brunson debacle in ways that really did not make sense and I think conveniently obviated some interesting facts and timelines and all that. I think I used that word correctly. I don't care if I didn't. You know what I mean?
First time I've ever heard it, but that's a Dartmouth word. Go on.
I think it's actually Texas. It's possible I used it wrong. And then the league announced that they were going to investigate the Dallas Mavericks for holding all their players out except for Luka in against the Chicago Bulls in their second to last game of the season. And Luka played a quarter in a minute because it was Slovenian night. Hope you didn't spend too much on your tickets, as I said before, to Slovenian night.
And he'd given the big rallying cry.
The big rallying cry. Yes. And so now they're under investigation. We could talk about whether we think that's fair. And then
tell you what, get the FBI involved. That's going to be a really difficult investigation to handle. I mean, wow. Who could tell what they're trying to do there?
We'll get there. And then Kyrie Irving skipped his exit interview. Okay.
I do want to clarify his exit interview with the media. I don't think he skipped out on the front office as far as I know, or coaches. He just didn't talk to the media.
Okay. Pawns. And Luka, in his exit interview with the media, took issue with your reporting.
Oh, that's a first.
Even though, let's be clear what Tim MacMahon reported.
I tried to make sure everybody was. Well, Luka was mocking me, but go on.
You cannot overestimate the degree to which people will see and hear only what they want to see and hear, or in this case, what they don't want to see and hear. I don't know which it is. Right. You reported that the Mavericks, or some sources within the Mavericks,
correct,
have a fear that if things don't change, that Luka Doncic may begin the process of perhaps requesting a trade as early as the summer of 2024. You did not report that Luka Doncic and his agents, Bill Duffy, et cetera, have gotten together and begun to plot this out, because they have not done it, to my knowledge. All you did was say, this team feels the same emotion rationally that any team in its position currently would feel vis-a-vis Luka Doncic. Absolutely. If the Mavericks weren't worried about Luka Doncic requesting a trade at some point during the life of his contract, they would have.
And they'd be complete doofuses.
Doofus is a great word. Nobody calls anybody doofuses anymore. I don't know if we should or not. I don't really know the origin of doofus, but I just like the way it sounds.
I should look it up. I'll look that up and obviate when we're done here. But yeah, right. I mean, honestly, to be clear, I didn't put this out there like, oh my gosh, what a revelation. This was, in the 13th, 14th paragraph of a, it was packed in the context of what an awful season it was. Here's what it can mean. Here's where the Mavs are. Here's the concerns moving forward. And like you said, this is common sense. Do you follow the NBA? Did you see what went down with Anthony Davis in New Orleans, with James Harden in Houston? Kevin Durant actually screwed up the timetable because he got out with 3.5 years left in Brooklyn. But summer 2024 is when Luka would have 2 years left on his contract, because we all know the player option, whether he can be ecstatic about staying in Dallas at that point or not, he's not picking up that player option because he's going to make a ton more money than that option is for that 5th year. So he's got 2024 will have 2 more years left, and you don't. If they have another miserable season next year, how couldn't he think about, man, dude, we're not any better off 6 years into my career than we were when they got me as a high lottery pick? Like, what
Tick,
are we doing here?
tick,
How do we do?
tick, tick.
Yeah, that's all
tick.
it is. And like, Zach, have we talked about this all year long? Yeah. Have honestly people within the Mavericks talked about it all year long?
We talked about it, you and I, since the second it became clear Jalen Brunson was going to New York. Whenever that was, and however you want to relitigate that, and I do not want to spend any time on this podcast relitigating all the shit that has gotten Dallas to this point, all the decisions, all the drip, drip, drip of talent out the door, all the talent that never came in the door because of draft and free agency decisions and mishaps, all that. The second Brunson was gone, the conversation went from the back burner, which is already a burner. Back burner is a burner. You can cook on the back burner up to the front burner. And it's been on the front burner ever since. And now the front burner is turned up a little bit. That's all.
Woo. Yeah, no, it's hot. It's hot. Look, and as we discussed yesterday with Luka, it's not like the Mavericks have never won. They went to a Western Conference Finals in the last year of his rookie deal. But then when the next step is not even a step back, they got knocked on their asses this year and ended up in the ditch. That's the only way to describe making a massive risk of a blockbuster trade mid-season and then tanking in the last couple of games to try to protect a lottery pick.
A trade neither of us liked, to be clear, at the time.
Right. I understood the desperation then. By the way, the desperation to make that trade is all part of this broader conversation that we're having. If they don't feel like, dude, how do we get a co-star? How do we get a co-star? Oh, God, we can't pass on the chance to get a co-star, even with all the risk. That trade was made in large part because of this pressure that comes with having Luka on the roster. And it's a blessing and a curse. Would you much rather have this pressure than not? Obviously, but it is pressure.
Can you take me through the whiplash of inspirational win against the Kings, everyone going all out, to Thunder beat the Jazz in a game that was, by the way, competitive for about 3 1/4 quarters, because the Thunder are not limping to the finish line, but like, it was not unreasonable. It would not have been unreasonable had Dallas not punted early to think, yeah, the Memphis B team, they might have a shot to beat the Thunder if the Thunder feel pressure in that last game. Like, that wouldn't have been a crazy outcome, even if Memphis sat Morant, sat Jackson, sat everybody. If you got Kenneth Lofton Jr., baby, you got a shot. And the Thunder are not blowing
G League Rookie of the Year.
Is it just as simple as the Thunder won that game and that was what they were waiting on? Like, can you just take me through how? And then they sit everybody but Luka, which is obviously then becomes clear that's for Slovenian night. So I get that, but can you add any clarity to me?
And I don't think it was just for Slovenian night, because again, if we're going to go through the whiplash, we've got to start with, there's this kind of, I'm going to call it a trial balloon that's sent up about, hey, the Mavs might tank this last week of the regular season. That talk starts getting out there on Monday. Luka, who very rarely talks after a home practice, talked Tuesday, and he had something he wanted to say. And that was, as long as there's a chance, I'm going to play. I wasn't part of that discussion. And they know not to come to me with that discussion. Like, I'm playing, even if there's a little chance, a slim chance. Okay. And then
if he doesn't play, who's going to yell at the referees? Are you going to have an easy day of work?
Oh, I thought he might get teed up during that last little quarter that he played and just go ahead and serve a suspension, but he didn't. So you have that. And then, he talked a little bit more and talks about, he was like transparent as he is. Hey, no, there's not confidence. How could there be? They'd lost, he said 9 of 10. It was 7 of 8 at a time. And, the chemistry is just not the same this year. And that's when I said, well, how much you guys miss Brunson? Because everybody knows what Brunson meant to that team that was around him. And he just looked so pained, and he said a lot. Just kind of shaking his head. So then we go the next day. Mark Cuban, who has not been available to the media very often. This has been a pretty significant shift really over the last couple of years since Nico Harrison got hired. He makes a point to kind of stroll out and make himself available about 2.5 hours before tip. talks to media for about 45 minutes. And his agenda was the Brunson blame, basically shifting it off him, all Rick Brunson's fault. We want to keep Kyrie, but then I think Cuban kind of put himself in a little bit when he wouldn't flat out say, hey, we're not going to get outbid, which he said about Brunson last year. It didn't end up being true, but he
when
said
are you too old for you to blame your own failures on your parents, or for people to blame things you do on your parents? I feel like the age of the statute of limitations passed on like being like, oh, Rick Brunson told Jalen what to do, and that's what happened.
Well, to be clear, Jalen's not blaming his dad. Jalen's happy.
Jalen is having a borderline All NBA year for a 5th seed in the Eastern Conference. That, by the way, I think is going to. Well, we'll see where Randall is.
Well,
I think it's going to put up a competitive series.
I was going to say I think that might be the best first round series. It's going to be a fun one. And then, about Luka's long term kind of optimism for the franchise, I thought Cuban really hit this one right on the money. Basically, I'm going to paraphrase, but he said, I think he wants to be here his whole career, but we've got to earn that. We've got to earn that. It is a direct quote.
So the fans need to listen, because he's telling them that they're worried. He's stating
the obvious. And it's a tough question to answer, because you can't say, oh my gosh, we're terrified, but you also can't say, dude, Luka's going to be here his whole career, because then Luka's like, oh wow, you're taking me for granted. So, it's a tough question to answer. I'll acknowledge that, but I thought what he said is 100% accurate. Then they go out, they beat the Kings. Kyrie goes bonkers in the fourth quarter, scores 19 in the fourth quarter. And you know what? That might have ended up being, we'll see how things play out, but that might have ended up being Kyrie Irving's last moments wearing a Dallas Mavericks uniform, because Friday they made the decision to pull the plug on the season. And I was shocked. I'm not going to lie to you. I was shocked when I got the alert for the injury report Friday morning, because everybody was listed as, they were ready to go, guns ablaze, and they're going to play everybody. And as you mentioned, they'd lost the Jazz had lost the previous night to the Thunder. So that was, it was win or be eliminated. And they knew, hey, if OKC wins their finale, you're eliminated anyways. The percentages said this was the rational move for the Mavericks to make. He laid out the pick protections with New York. If you're top 10, 80% chance, you keep it. If you're not, it's like an 8-point-something% chance. They were tied with the Bulls for the 10th best odds. So losing to the Bulls is like a double whammy in the tank direction you're trying to go. The only reason I was shocked by all this was because Luka had been so firm and so adamant, and by his standards, really was a rallying cry. He even mentioned, I always say, you got to believe. Like I said it when we were down 2-0 against the Suns last year. You always got to believe when you got any chance.
69 Mets, baby.
There you go. And then obviously they lose those last two. Luka did come out for exit interviews, and I asked Luka, what changed from when you said that Tuesday to Friday? And he just said, I didn't like that decision. That's it. Were you involved in it? Did they discuss it with you? He's like, yeah, obviously. And basically just said, hey, we came to an agreement, and essentially they did something he didn't want to do. And what it comes down to is this. Obviously, the Mavericks are walking on eggshells with Luka. And that's not a criticism of him. We can talk about any team with any, once you get to a certain status as a superstar, franchises walk on eggshells with these guys. It's just the way it is. The decision ultimately was, hey, Luka might be pissed about this right now, but the only chance for his long-term happiness is for us to really make drastic progress building a roster around him. And dude, if we don't have a top 10 pick this year, oh boy.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN Plus.